Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Here we are getting you your weekly dose of major international news with a perspective. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. Will the Snowden affair jeopardize US President Barack Obama's Moscow trip? World Panorama takes a look at how the whistleblower has become a problem for both US and Russia. Tensions remain high in Bangladesh in its sixth verdict since formation and second in the week. War Crimes Tribunal sentences Ali Hassan Mujahideen to death for crimes committed during 1971. Egypt's interim cabinet sworn in, but the transition seems far from easy. Muslim Brotherhood in no mood to relent, more protests planned. And Jack Hoffman, a young brain cancer survivor who scored a touchdown in the Nebraska spring football game, honored at the ESPY Awards. Straight to the story in focus this week. The White House is considering cancelling a fall summit between President Barack Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow, a move that would further aggravate the already tense relationship between the two leaders. The White House is dangling that option over the Russians as Moscow considers a temporary asylum petition from Edward Snowden, the American accused of leaking information about classified US intelligence programs. But officials have privately signaled that scrapping the bilateral talks would also be retaliation for other areas of disagreement with Russia, including its continued support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's attacks against civilians. Why? Because the standoff between the US and Russia over Edward Snowden may threaten a planned summit between Obama and Putin as the case further strains an already frayed relationship. Cancelling the summit would deal a blow to Obama administration's efforts to smoothen relations with Russia and would be a direct challenge to Putin's prestige as well. Russia assumed the G20 presidency, remember, for the first time last December, and Putin is the host for the group's annual summit. What happens over the next few days is crucial, as it will determine not only where the United States and Russia stand in terms of their bilateral relationship, but also where all this is headed. Joining me to discuss this is Sandeep Dixit, Senior Assistant Editor with The Hindu. But before we discuss that, here's a report that I've compiled for you.
Russian President Vladimir Putin firmly defended his decision to grant asylum to US whistleblower Edward Snowden and urged the United States to take the move in its stride.
Мы предупредили господина Сноудена, что любая его деятельность, связанная с нанесением ущерба российско-американским отношениям, для нас неприемлемо.
For more than 3 weeks, Snowden has been holed up at the Moscow airport, trying to avoid prosecution in the United States on espionage charges. A lawyer helping Snowden with his asylum request said that he could leave Moscow airport within a week.
Будет он, я думаю, в ближайшие дни, поскольку требуется оформление определенных документов. Поэтому я думаю, что в течение недели этот вопрос будет решен. А дальше, соответственно, будет решаться вопрос о предоставлении ему временного убежища.
The White House said there was ample legal justification for former CIA contractor to stand trial and asked Russia to return him to US.
Our position is that Mr. Snowden ought to be expelled and returned to the United States, and that he should not be allowed to engage in further international travel except as necessary to return to the United States. You know, he is not a human rights activist. He is not a dissident. He's accused of leaking classified information. He's been charged with 3 felony counts related to the leaking of classified information. And for those reasons, he should be returned to the United States.
In line with Russian law, refugee status is granted for 1 year with possible annual extension. It allows freedom of movement in the country and the right to work. If the Federal Migration Service denies the application, Snowden will have to return to a transit zone at any airport in Russia. Meanwhile, some local experts believe that Snowden had created a dilemma for Russia. A rejection of his request will go against humanitarianism, while approval will irritate Washington.
All right, Sandeep, welcome to World Panorama. Let me start by asking you, at this point, who is Snowden more of a problem for, US or Russia?
Russia is evidently in an advantageous position, and they're playing it by the ear. And they will be trying to derive the maximum advantage possible from it. So this is a diplomatic game between the US on one side and countries that it has hurt in the previous past, or the relationship has not been as good, countries that would be trying to extract some mileage about it. because we should not forget that despite Russian protests for over 10 years, they put a missile defense shield around it. There was creeping of the NATO towards Russia. What was earlier agreed upon was not observed. So obviously Russia, and then there are Latin American countries also who would want their pound of flesh in turn for what the US corporates have done to them.
Right. So let me also ask you then, what is Russia risking in all of this?
Russia is not really risking anything. Snowden has obviously a lot more that is over there. And I will like to recall an incident a year back. There was a person called Victor Bolt, a Russian citizen. He was arrested in Bangkok for alleged arms smuggling.
Okay.
Vladimir Putin himself made a request to free Bolt, send him to Russia, but US overrode all that and they took him away to the US to for prosecution for allegedly supplying arms to a Colombian rebel group.
Okay.
So this kind of a game in world espionage and counter-espionage, this takes place. But what is very, very important is, what is most noteworthy is that under the words of freedom and democracy and freedom of expression, a lot has been happening. And for this, I would like to take you back again by a year. There was an international conference before which Russia, China and India had said that the servers that are controlled by Americans as such, they should be more democratized.
Okay.
And so we had op-ed articles all over the place, including in India, saying that no, that should not be done because traffic should not be allowed to be controlled by these countries because they're not exactly great destinations of free speech. And now we know what was happening.
Yeah.
You know, the servers have been controlled ever since they have been made by the US and its allies who are joined at the hip in terms of race, religion, and orientation towards the world.
Okay, then what is Russia's position? Let me also ask you this, because there have been various reports. They're saying that granting asylum to Snowden has nothing to do with the president. It's not a presidential matter. On the same time, we hear Putin making statements like nothing. Such squabbles should not jeopardize the relations between US and Russia. So it's interesting to see how things will develop from here on. The US is not confirming or denying President Obama's bilateral meet that's supposed to happen before the G20 summit that's scheduled in St. Petersburg. How do you see things moving from here on? Do you see Obama
Yeah, well, I
coming
think
on?
this leakage of news about Obama wanting to cancel the meeting with Putin, I think it's a diversionary tactics.
Okay.
It's a diversionary tactics from the double standards that have been done so far, you know, where forget enemies, forget potential aggressors, even friends have not been spared in this. So, in fact, I was reading some news reports about what you mentioned, and one of the reporters, a respected reporters from Washington, a palace reporter, he says cancellation would be a slap on the face of Putin. Now, you and I, by wildest stretch of imagination, can't imagine how this would be. So, this is clearly they're trying to divert it away from some very, very serious topics. And that serious topics is joint world governance of space, of cyberspace. These two aspects have to be discussed because they've never been aired in the United Nations or in a multi-country forum. And we need a great deal of democratization on this, so that this kind of thing does not happen where taking advantage of technological superiority, someone is then spying over violating the privacy of practically everyone on the globe.
Absolutely, point taken. Now, also this whole thing that we are seeing, this diplomatic sort of to and fro between US and Russia, it's just not about Snowden, because there are other issues that have remained between US and Russia over a very long period of time. Is this a good time for these two nations then perhaps to come at, be on the same page?
The United States has seen the economic writing on the wall. So the aggression that was there has waned in the last 3 or 4 years. If you see the last 3 or 4 years, the wars have all been carried out by the Europeans, whether it's in Mali or in Libya. So US has a hands-off policy in terms of being too aggressive about it. But yes, there is going to be friction. There's going to be friction on the Arctic shelf, for instance, even in the Antarctica region, for instance. On climate change, they have a different stand. And there are a huge lot of bilateral issues. And in fact, on the world stage, US and Russia might get into a bit of competition over oil and hydrocarbon with shale gas coming in the US. So lots of dynamics at play currently. And Snowden is not helping resolve any of them, I think.
Absolutely, that's not happening for the moment. So if I ask you over the next few months, let's say Obama does come to Moscow and attends that bilateral meet, is at the G20 summit in St. Petersburg, how do things go from here on? Because as we were talking about in the past, the relationship has only soured and these issues are really not helping.
It's very difficult to say what's going to happen in international politics, and guessing is a very hazardous thing, but what I feel is that maybe the world community or people who genuinely love freedom, they should be looking at both Julius Assange case in Ecuador, in the Ecuadorian embassy, and that's a very strange thing. I find that no one is speaking out against him, when if that had happened in China or in Russia, and it has happened in China, where this blind activist entered the US embassy, and then there was a hue and cry and he had to be put on a plane and sent back.
Absolutely.
And here you have two cases where the reaction of those very same people is very different. So I'm surprised by the lack of number of people who are talking about it. But as I said, September United Nations opens, and I hope sub-country brings in a draft resolution that tries to democratize internet as well as cyberspace and space.
Very good points that we have come out of this discussion. Thanks so much, Sandeep, for joining me on World Panorama and sharing your thoughts with us. On that note, we'll take a very short break. I'll be back with more world news. Also, a look at the continuous protest by the Muslim Brotherhood, even as the interim cabinet gets to work in Egypt. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying with us. Torn by violent protests that show no signs of dying out anytime soon, Egypt has sworn in a new cabinet. A cabinet that faces a dire task of rebuilding an economy wrecked by 2.5 years of turmoil and bringing stability. Morsi's removal has bitterly divided Egypt, with thousands of his supporters maintaining a vigil in a Cairo square to demand his return, swelling to tens of thousands for mass demonstrations every few days.
A week of relative calm suggested peace might be returning to Egypt. But that was shattered by street battles. At least 7 people were killed here in Cairo as supporters of deposed Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi clashed with police.
دلوقتي عاملين قصاد علينا هم الشرطه الداخليه والجيش وراهم والبلطجيه وراهم مش راضيين يعدونا ليه؟ احنا مش مسلمين زيهم؟ مش مفروض احرار؟
We're not expecting support from anybody. We are only depending on ourselves.
Egypt still is far from stability in what seems to be a turbulent transition. Egypt swore in its new interim cabinet on Tuesday, naming mainly liberals and technocrats to lead a transition to civilian rule. The new cabinet does not include any members of the Brotherhood or the Noor party, the nation's two principal Islamist groups that over past 2 years dominated politics. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton became the latest senior international figure to visit Egypt's interim rulers. She also met senior figures in Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood.
We've talked with a lot of people about the prospect of elections to take place in the next few months. If those elections happen, the role that the European Union could play in helping to monitor, observe those elections. We've talked about building on the statements that I've made and the many phone conversations I've had with people here, the importance of a very inclusive process to ensure that this country, as it does belong to everyone here, that people can feel that they are participating in that.
Meanwhile, the US again refused to say whether Morsi's ouster by the military was a coup.
President Obama has made clear our very deep concern about the decision of the Egyptian armed forces to remove the president from power and suspend the constitution. But the fact is, we need to take the time necessary, because of the complexity of this situation, to evaluate what has taken place.
The army stepped in to remove Morsi after days of mass protests, calling for the Islamist leader's removal on grounds that he failed to solve any of country's pressing problems, including crumbling security and an ailing economy. His opponents also accused him of concentrating too much power in his own hands.
And Bangladesh's War Crime Tribunal gave its second high-profile verdict in 3 days. First was Jamaat-e-Islami's former chief Ghulam Azam. He was awarded life imprisonment till death. In the second verdict, judges found Jamaat-e-Islami's Secretary General Ali Ehsan Muhammad Mujahid guilty on 5 charges, including murder, rape and looting during the nation's struggle for freedom from Pakistan 4 decades ago. The tribunal has so far handed down verdicts in 6 cases since its creation in March 2010. And these sentences have exposed deep divisions in Bangladesh over the war and how to deal with calls for justice.
A Bangladesh War Crime Tribunal sentenced a top Islamist politician to death on 17 July for crimes during a 1971 War of Independence. Ali Ehsan Muhammad Mujahid, the 65-year-old Secretary General of the Jamaat-e-Islami Party, was convicted on charges of genocide, conspiracy in killing intellectuals, torture and abduction.
There were 7 charges brought against Mr. Mujahid in this case. Out of the 7 charges, 5 has been beyond reasonable doubt proved by the prosecution. And out of these 5 charges, 3 charges have been given death penalty, 1 for the life imprisonment and 1 for the 5 years imprisonment.
What followed the verdict was violence that broke out between police and Mujahid supporters across the country. The tribunal on 15th July sentenced Ghulam Azam, the 91-year-old former chief of Jamaat, to jail for the rest of his life. Azam remains a key figure in the group who was found guilty of torture and the murder of unarmed people during the 1971 struggle.
Professor Ghulam Azam, then Amir of East Pakistan Jamaat-e-Islami, for his alleged involvement in crimes against humanity. He has been tried for 5 charges. He has been found guilty of all the 5 charges, and the tribunal came to a conclusion that he deserves highest penalty of death. But considering his age and ailments in prison, he has been awarded different terms of sentence, totaling a sentence of 90 years or unto death in prison.
The crimes for which Azam and his colleagues in the Jamaat-e-Islami Party are being tried were committed 42 years ago. Bangladesh says up to 3 million people were killed in what the judges at Azam's trial called the worst genocide since World War II.
1971 সালে 30 লক্ষ মানুষের হত্যা এবং 2 লক্ষ মামুনের সম্ভ্রমহানির জন্য এই গোলাম আজম মূল পরিকল্পনাকারীকে ফাঁসি না দিয়ে তার যারা অনুসারী তাদেরকে ফাঁসি দেওয়া হয়েছে, সেটাকে আমরা প্রহসন মনে করছি।
আমার বাবার রক্ত আছে এই দেশের মাটিতে, এই দেশ স্বাধীন করতে আমি কি আশা করতে পারি তখন একটি আইনের কাছে, রাষ্ট্রের কাছে? অতএব আমরা চাই, এই মঞ্চ থেকে দাবি করছি, আর কোনো প্রহসন নয়। এই প্রহসন আমরা বিচার আমরা মানি না, আমরা গোলাম আজমের ফাঁসি চাই।
5 more Jamaat leaders and 2 from BNP are on trial. The tribunal is due to deliver verdicts in their cases soon. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina set up the tribunal in 2010 to investigate abuses during the conflict, and it delivered its first verdict in January. The Prime Minister's opponents say she is using the tribunal against the 2 biggest opposition parties, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party and the Jamaat-e-Islami.
A look at Globe Watch, other international news compiled for you in a quick wrap.
Palestinian leaders gathered on Thursday to discuss a possible US-brokered resumption of Israel-Palestinian peace talks. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was due to begin briefing fellow PLO leader in Ramla shortly on his meeting this week with US Secretary of State John Kerry. Abbas had met with Kerry in Jordan on Wednesday and said after the meeting that differences between both sides had narrowed very significantly. Russia's most prominent opposition activist Alexei Navalny was freed from jail pending appeal Friday in a surprise move a day after he was convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 5 years in prison. An anti-corruption activist who became the most popular figure to emerge from protests that erupted around Putin's return to the Kremlin last year, Navalny was accused of embezzlement and a handful of other charges after Putin unleashed a crackdown on the opposition in the wake of his inauguration. Greek deputies narrowly approved another wave of layoffs and wage cuts affecting thousands of public sector workers Thursday, hours ahead of a rare visit to the country by the German finance minister. The bill of reforms gives thousands of civil servants, including teachers and municipal police, 8 months on reduced salaries to find new posts elsewhere or accept those offered to them. Otherwise, they will lose their jobs. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside Parliament for the late-night vote, a day after thousands had demonstrated in a general strike called against the reform. Young people and low-skilled in many European countries will continue to struggle for jobs as unemployment is set to remain high in 2014. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said in its 2013 Employment Outlook. The OECD said that unemployment, with already about 48 million people out of work across the 34 OECD member countries, was likely to remain high through most of next year. ArcelorMittal, the world's top steel maker, said it would scrap a planned steel plant in India due to delays in acquiring land and an iron ore mine, obstacles that have also caused South Korea's POSCO to abandon plans. The decision to scrap the planned 12 million tons a year plant in the eastern state of Odisha came a day after the world's fifth biggest steelmaker, POSCO, pulled out of a project in Karnataka. The failed project will be a blow to India's federal government. A spell of torrential rain pounded central China's Hubei province Wednesday night, killing 4 people and affecting more than 20,000 residents. Many roadside stores and residential buildings were flooded and a number of vehicles parked outside were submerged as the continuous rainstorm brought more than 2-meter deep floods to urban areas.
Shifting gears, time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed through this week. Here's all the sports action.
Little Jack Hoffman's touchdown run at the Nebraska spring game has won an ESPY for the best moment. Jack and his father, Andy, accepted the ESPN award Wednesday night at the Nokia Theatre in Los Angeles. The 8-year-old from Atkinson, Nebraska has brain cancer. The video of the scoring scamper has been played on national TV and viewed more than 8 million times on YouTube. Formula One chief executive Bernie Ecclestone has been charged with bribing a German banker to smooth the sale of a stake in the motor racing business to private equity firm CVC 8 years ago. German prosecutors confirmed on Thursday. Ecclestone, 82, has denied wrongdoing and will fight to clear his name. The case centers upon a $44 million payment to German banker in 2005 when BNLB was selling a 48% stake in Formula One to CVC, a private equity investor that Ecclestone was keen to see as a new shareholder. Coach Brendan Rodgers has again emphasized Liverpool are not going to sell Luis Suarez, their volatile Uruguayan striker. Liverpool have insisted that the talismanic striker, who was last season's second top scorer in the Premier League with 23 goals, was not for sale. In several interviews in his homeland, the 26-year-old repeated a desire to leave the Premier League club and play in Spain, blaming the British media for making his life impossible in England. Lionel Messi said that he is optimistic his advisors will be able to sort out his tax problems after he and his father were accused last month of defrauding the Spanish tax authorities. The Argentine World Player of the Year and his father George, who both denied wrongdoing, allegedly hid more than €4 million by filing false tax returns for the year 2006 to 2009. Messi is one of the world's highest paid athletes and earns just over $20 million a season in wages and bonuses, according to Forbes magazine. Queen Elizabeth met the England and Australian cricket teams on Thursday at Lord's in London ahead of the second Ashes Test match of the summer. The Queen was introduced to both squads by their respective captains, Alastair Cook and Michael Clarke. England currently lead the 5-match series 1-0 after their thrilling win at Trent Bridge over the weekend.
Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
Australian actor Hugh Jackman was met by huge crowds at the UK premiere of The Wolverine in London after the events of the third X-Men movie, X-Men The Last Stand. The story, which is based on the 1982 comic books by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller, follows Wolverine as he travels to Japan, where he meets an old acquaintance and has his healing factor taken from him. Jackman not only stars at the central role but is also acting as producer on the movie. The Wolverine begins its global release from July 24th. 4 Pussy Riot members wearing neon dresses, their faces hidden behind balaclavas, climb up gas flares and dance on oil pipelines in a fresh video released by the punk band. The video accuses Putin of allowing only his closest allies access to the giant proceeds generated by the Russian energy industry and shows band members unfurling a large Pussy Riot banner on a gas station run by state oil firm Rosneft. Film studio 20th Century Fox has announced plans to add a Broadway division to its brand. The 78-year-old company is joining forces with veteran Broadway producers Kevin McCullum and film producers John Davis and Tom McGrath to produce 9 to 12 stage productions developed from the studio's 4,500 title catalogue. For years, Disney has dominated Broadway's landscape with the success of The Lion King, Mary Poppins and The Beauty and the Beast. However, Horwitz said the team will be looking to create a new model of success. Halle Berry, a Best Actress Oscar winner for the 2001 film Monsters Ball, is pregnant with the couple's child due this fall. They announced their engagement early last year. It is the third marriage for Berry, while Martinez has never previously married and was once romantically linked to singer Kylie Minogue. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling secretly posed as a retired military policeman to write a crime novel that has been hailed as one of the best debut detective stories in years. Rowling wrote The Cuckoo's Calling under the name Robert Galbraith and kept up the pretense that it was the work of a married father of two and former undercover investigator. The novel has sold around 1,500 copies in hardback. However, in the hours after Rowling was named as its author, it shot up the bestseller charts.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. As I sign off, take a look at how South Africans celebrated Nelson Mandela's 95th birthday. All the good wishes seem to have done some good to his health as well. He's doing well now at the Pretoria Hospital. This is me, Sana Khan, signing off.